Ladies and gentlemen, I think I speak for all of us when I say that everybody assumed that when the ANC formed the GNU, that South Africa would see a resurgence in its global position, that the stupid stuff it said in the last administration, by the ANC, of course, would no longer be said. And yet, that's not what we're finding. In fact, we're actually finding that the stupid rhetoric has got worse under the GNU than it ever has before. In any case, before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again ask you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you really want to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So let's actually get on to some of the news stories of today. So let's actually get on to the first news story, that apparently some parliamentary questions are not being answered. This is basically, in Parliament, how you hold a minister to account as you raise questions. The minister has to go away, provide written answers to those questions, and come back to Parliament and you can discuss it. You should, in theory, report back and say, here's the answers to the questions that you've asked. And would you know, the worst performing minister happens to be the police minister, who's only responded to 27 of 74 questions ever asked in Parliament. Now, there are numerous reasons for this. The first could be that he basically just doesn't have the facts to hand, and the second is essentially that he could, in theory, have no control over the police ministry. Neither of them are plausible, although by all metrics, apparently this police minister is doing better than the last police minister. Now, interestingly enough, Paul Mashatile actually has got the most questions, as 738 questions from Parliament, of which he failed to respond to 222 of them. He's actually not doing that bad. It looks like Paul does actually respond to the majority of his questions. However, it's very interesting to note that one of the parties who are highlighted as being a frequent individual who failed to respond to his questions was the DA's Agricultural Minister, John Steenhuisen. So it would appear that the DA gets things done in Cape Town, but they don't get done in Parliament. Anyway, moving swiftly on, let's move on to our health minister. Moron. Now, many individuals ask me why I call him moron. And that's because not only being stubborn, thick-headed, he also says some really dumb stuff. Like this quacker of a line. He was addressing a TB gathering. He was basically talking about HIV and TB testing. And during it, he says, and I quote, "If you don't want TB, stop breathing." What a quacker of a line, eh? Now, what he's actually trying to say is that basically, if you breathe, you're going to get it. And the only way not to get it would be to stop breathing, which is impossible. So we actually need to sit there and basically do some testing, because you're likely to get it if you live in an area with high TB. But that's not what the quack said. He said, if you don't want TB, just stop breathing. I think he meant to say all the other stuff, but I don't know, maybe his brain stopped working. Now, you see, one of the reasons that his brain maybe stopped working is because he was too busy issuing cannabis directions. This is the regulations that he issued that banned cannabis and hemp food products. Now, whilst this became really interesting, is because underneath the last administration, and even in this administration, Ramaphosa keeps going around and promoting the potential growth benefits, economic growth benefits, that South Africa can achieve by growing cannabis. We've heard this in numerous states of the nations. We should all jump in on the cannabis bandwagon and grow loads. Maybe in the Eastern Cape, he says. And we can export and we can become like a big player. And then more on banned cannabis and hemp food products. Now, the news is that apparently he didn't consult Ramaphosa on this. He just did things on his own, which, I'm going to be honest, is one of the worries that everybody has when it comes to the NHI. The majority of the power will sit with the health minister. And this is a good example of the health minister just being a moron. And you see, the problem is that apparently Ramaphosa was then lobbied by industry, who said, dude, you've been telling us to grow this stuff for ages, and now you go out there and like ban some of it? What are you smoking? Cannabis, maybe? And he obviously said, well, I'll speak to my health minister. And having consulted all the stakeholders, had the public backlash, Ramaphosa said, dude, this was dumb. And now he's had to basically withdraw the regulations which he gazetted banning the food products, which would contain cannabis and hemp. And you see, this highlights exactly why we don't want an NHI. Because the people that would run it are just going to be retarded. They are just going to be retarded. Talking of retarded, the ANC's got a budget which it needs to pass, and the dates to pass it are actually getting quite short now. And you see, this news is actually a very interesting news story, because the DA basically said, we'll support your budget, but we want concessions. We want you to relook at all these pieces of legislation and policy positions that are causing us like chest pains. And unfortunately, the ANC has said, well, they're not up for negotiation. If you don't agree with us, we'll get support from the EFF, who said, not going to happen. Then they said, we'll ask the MK party. And they said, no VAT increase from us. And he was like, you know who we can rely on? Action SA. Action SA hate the DA. They'll support us. And news is the Action SA said, we won't support you either. So it does now appear that the ANC is out on its own, which does mean that when it comes through to the next budget, they might not actually have the numbers to vote it in. That's going to be very interesting, because we have never had that situation in South Africa, at least not in time I can remember. So what will actually be the outcome of this, we don't know. You know what else we don't know? Well, news is that the SACP, obviously, I reported on this already, and no one watched that video, because no one cares about the SACP. But they are going to be contesting the next local elections on their own. And this is causing the ANC problems, because as Fikile Mbalula says, they were bound together by the NDR. And so there's a bunch of contradictions between the alliance and society as a whole, because the alliance was bound together by the NDR, and well, society don't really care, so per se. But what he does say is that it's very curious that the SACP has decided to go out and basically canvass on its own. Because you see, if COSATU tried to do that, he says there are members of COSATU who are not members of the ANC, but there are no members of the SACP that are not members of the ANC. It's just the way the configuration of the alliance worked out. So in effect, they are directly competing against themselves. Although I would say, Fikile, you're saying that you two were bound together by the principles of the NDR, but I've frequently said in other videos that your definitions, or the way that you define what the NDR is, does differ. Because the ANC's idea is that it's a way to transform society and make it more equal. In other words, it's a way to get the black lower class into middle class and upper class echelons of the economy. The SACP view it as a way to basically usher in socialism and then communism. The end goals of the NDR are very different according to who you speak to. You may all both subscribe to this doctrine, but the way you view it is different. In any case, Fikile does say that if the SACP continues to do what they want to do, it's going to split the alliance. So, go figure. Right? In other news, you know what else is splitting the alliance? Except it's not. Apparently, 49 religious leaders have ditched the ANC, the ACDP, and the ARA in the Western Cape. They've all joined the DA, because apparently they don't want the DA to basically be splintered now in the Western Cape, and potentially meaning that there will be coalition governments, or maybe potentially even the ANC takes over. This doesn't spell well for the ANC in the Western Cape, because the ANC is already dead, like dead. And that's just going to die some more. I suppose good news for the DA in that respect. But according to the ARA, apparently this news that these religious leaders who, supposedly these religious leaders will bring their congregations, which will bolster up numbers. Not sure if they've actually been to any of these churches, but that's generally not how it works. But in any case, apparently the ARA says that some of these leaders are all basically bull rubbish. Apparently they're like leaders with no congregations. They're leaders of themselves. So apparently this news is hogwash. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. On to the final news story, and this is probably my most interesting news story of the day, and that is Ramaphosa says that basically whoever Rasul's replacement is going to be, he needs to be top-notch. Now, you may recall a couple of days ago, Ramaphosa also said, guys, can you stop saying really stupid things? And he meant really stupid things. And he was saying that in relation to the ANC, because the ANC were inflaming Donald Trump and the Americans. And Fikile Mbalula was like, hold my beer, because he went and addressed a democratic nursing organization, basically a union, and he had lots to say about Trump. Now, specifically, the reason he was doing that was because of obviously all the aid cuts. But he basically said, the United States is being alt-right, exhibiting fascist characteristics. And he claimed that they were reinforcing outdated racial tendencies. He said that they were the authors of neocolonialism, modern-day imperialism, steeped in entrenching racial inequality and disdain for human solidarity, steeped in warmongering and ethnic cleansing. Yes, these are strong words. He then further went on to say that the Americans were basically using their powers against South Africa to block any attempt to hold Israel accountable for its violation of international law. And he said that basically, why shouldn't they hold Israel accountable when America is trying to hold Vladimir Putin accountable? He says it's not equal. And I suppose maybe he could make an argument there. Maybe. In any case, he further went on to say that we have fringe racist organizations such as AfriForum and Solidarity getting emboldened and making calls tantamount to reversing the gains of our freedom and yearning for the return of minority rule, thus the return of apartheid. I'm so bored of this apartheid rubbish. Like, there's no apartheid coming back. There's no desire by anybody to see apartheid come back. Please stop talking trash. This is complete hogwash. We live in 2025. This is not 1925. Please stop smoking the marijuana. Maybe moron, the health minister, should ban it, because it's clearly going to Fikile Mbalula's brain. In any case, he says that the ANC would not falter in its duty to advance a better Africa and a better world. Dude, have you seen Africa? Like, it ain't doing that great. That's usually because there's lots of socialist dictators everywhere that are just like destroying the countries that they live in, like South Africa. And you can't say that you're going to create a better world when you can't create a better country yourself. South Africa ain't doing that great under your rule. So what do you want? The rest of the world to look like South Africa? Mind you, we do say on this channel quite a bit that the South Africanization of the rest of the world is occurring at a fast pace. I mean, lots of people that will say to us, well, I'm going to immigrate. Everything here is terrible. Everything's terrible everywhere. Like the entire world is just going doolally. And of course, I'm going to get that guy in the comment section that goes, come to Australia, it's brilliant. Yeah, I know more enough about what's happening in Australia to also think, what a disastrous location to go live in. In any case, that's just my comments. I'm sure you'll let me know your comments in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.